Coming up next on Picking Up the Pieces, Dare to Persevere, Maryann Davis, national expert on transition age youth. Hello, I'm Kim Bissett, and I'd like to welcome you to Picking Up the Pieces, Dare to Persevere. And I'd like to welcome Maryann Davis. She's our national expert on transition age youth, and we're here to celebrate Children's Mental Health Awareness Day. Welcome.
Thank you, Kim.
So let's start off. Tell us about yourself, Maryann.
Well, I grew up in Northborough, Massachusetts. Stayed in the area until I went down to the southeast to study, do my graduate work, my professional training. Returned here with my husband. We have a couple of daughters, a 10 and a 14-year-old. And since 1995, I've been working at the University of Massachusetts Medical School, studying transition age youth and the systems that serve them.
Now, why did you decide to focus on transition age youth? Because it's kind of an unusual subset that often gets overlooked.
Yeah, I think my interest started, I had gone to a research conference when I was training as a clinical psychologist, and had seen some data presented from a variety of studies that showed really concerning outcomes during young adulthood for adolescents who had been receiving services because they had a serious mental health condition. So that piqued my interest on the one hand. And then on the other hand, as I started to talk to people, a lot of folks talked about that being a stage of life where it was really hard for people who've been getting services to continue. And I didn't understand what that was about. Why is that? Why should that be? And that actually got me starting to study really the population, their needs, and the systems, because it's ends up being a very particularly complicated sort of interface on young people changing in lots of ways, needing lots of supports, and systems not connecting well during this stage of life for them.
And let's explore that a little bit. So the systems aren't connecting well, it's not meeting their needs. In what ways?
Oh, I'd say in particular, we tend to have broken our systems up into systems that serve children, for good reasons, because children have different needs from adults. And then we have our systems that serve adults. And then as one starts to walk across those systems as a young adult or a transition age youth, it's not the dominant population for either one of those systems. They're kind of like a specialty population in some ways, if you will. And so the systems hadn't focused on their needs. And in essence, they fell through the cracks of consideration. So I think that's basically, I don't think it was anybody's intention to not serve that age group well, but they're a small portion of the adult system and they're a small portion of the child system, so they kind of got lost.
Right, and let's talk about they have very distinct developmental needs.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, they
do. That aren't really met. Let's talk about a little bit more about how that happens.
Well, so I think if any of us look back on our transition into adulthood, or if we have children who are in this stage of our lives, or if we're somebody who is in this stage of life, we realize that an awful lot of what's going on is we're learning how to do things that we're going to need to do a lot as an adult. So we're finishing our schooling, we're trying to move into our working lives. At the same time, we're trying to figure out how to live independently, how to make money, all these various things that we expect young adults to be able to do. This is the time when we learn how to do that, and that launches us into adulthood. In the children's system, we tend to think more about dependent children sort of in the bosom of their families, so to speak. In the adult system, we tend to think about independent young adults or independent adults with families not as clearly involved with expectations that people know how to make appointments and keep appointments, go to things, that there are a lot of assumptions about what adults do, because that's mostly who the adult system serves. So this developing those skills and capacities for the first time isn't what the adult system is thinking about, and historically has not been what the kid system has been thinking about in terms of, oh, this person is about to become a legally independent adult. What do we need to help them do to prepare for that stage of life? So I think those are sort of the key aspects of where the systems haven't really latched onto, oh, this is a really important dynamic stage of life.
Yes.
Where things are changing, and they're very important that we get good foundations down at this period of time.
Absolutely. They have these unique needs that they need to kind of be taught how to be an adult, but no one's there teaching them, so they don't meet the needs in the adult system, so they don't connect to it. And the adult system comes at them with a lot of paperwork and all this kind of expectations that a lot of times they need someone to sit down and say, okay, this is how you use a schedule book.
Right.
This is how you set reminders for all these different appointments that you're now responsible on your own to go to, where someone used to drive you there and tell you 8 times that what time it was at and things like that.
Yeah.
And it has to be done in a very concrete way. Now, some of these things we know kind of anecdotally if we have young adults in our lives or we've had worked with them or experiencing. What does the research tell us about what are the unique needs of these young adults?
So the research tells us a variety of things. One is for the types of treatments that are most common when young people have mental health needs, for outpatient psychotherapy, for example, that out of any age group, this is the age group that is most likely to drop out of treatment. Now, we don't have, unfortunately, the research doesn't tell us what the reasons are that are unique to this age group, but there are probably some shared reasons with other age groups as well. So what we, in general, in research, a lot of things we have are findings that sort of raise red flags without the details of how do we solve the problem.
Yes.
So research also tells us that this group of young people with serious mental health conditions and those developmental changes that tend to occur in adolescents and young adults as a group are often delayed in that psychosocial development, so to speak, compared to their peers who don't have a serious mental health condition. So we know that even if we would, we don't typically expect any 18-year-old to really jump off and be a full-flourished young adult.
No.
Even if they've had, all types
Wouldn't it be boring if they did, like they were like on time for everything and
they would be bored.
Yeah. They would be bored. They would probably be alienated too. They'd be like, how come you've got everything together?
And then for the population that is very vulnerable in lots of ways, they're typically, as a group, and individuals are going to vary tremendously.
Absolutely.
Of course, we're going to have some young adults who are, very responsible and very organized and used to, doing things in what we would think of as a fairly adult way. But as a population, they tend to be more delayed than their same age peers. So that's another piece that if we are thinking about their developmental needs, and you think about a typical 18-year-old, you then have to ratchet back a little bit to say, well, how do we provide supports to somebody who's a little bit younger?
Right.
So there's that kind of finding in the research. The research is growing, so there hasn't been a lot of research focused on this age group. Quite honestly, we've worked pretty hard to try to encourage more people to do research so that we understand what are the ways in which basically the kinds of evidence-based treatments and interventions that we already have for either younger children or mature adults, how do those work specifically for this age group? Maybe some we don't need to even tweak. Some of them we could just apply and they would work just fine, where others may need some really pretty significant changes. And those are the ways in which research is starting to happen more. There's a lot of emphasis on how to help young people have an active voice in not just their own services and treatments, but also in the way the systems are changed. So there are researchers out there that are looking at how to enhance that participation. There's research looking at various ways that we can modify existing services. A lot of it has to do with trying to think about, like, say, for example, families. We know that this is a time of life when young people's relationships with their families change radically. It's not that family is irrelevant. Family is extremely relevant, but it's certainly the case that young people are trying to develop their independence from their families.
Yes.
And so how you try to help a young person make changes in their lives and think about, well, can we involve their family, is really going to vary tremendously from young person to young person, depending on where they are in their sort of developmental relationship with their own family.
Right.
So a lot of the intervention research that is out there is trying to take a look at how do we know when and how to involve not only family but other members of their social network, which is typically a different social network than you see in more mature adults who have sort of settled into maybe family life or settled into a circle of friends that's not going to change. This is a time of life when that's a fairly dynamic kind of thing, who's in somebody's social network, so to speak. So a lot of the intervention research is trying to figure out how do we involve others to help young people make changes, because we know that change is hard. It's easier if you have help.
Right.
So those kinds of questions are out there for researchers to answer. And then other kinds of things of, how much do you need to be comprehensive in your approach? So depending on what the target is of the intervention, Is it important, say, when you're trying to help somebody with a job? For this age group, many young people don't just work or they don't just go to school. They're trying to finish up their schooling, get ahead in schooling, while often needing to support themselves at the same time. Or they might do it sequentially, do a little school, do a little work, go back to school. That's typical in the general population. When a young person needs help to achieve those through formal interventions, our interventions typically don't go back and forth between the two of them as much. And in mature adults, you have a lot less of that education and training going on. So trying to figure out how to do that well. How do we support a young person to be doing both at the same time, or to do it sequentially? Or really, how do we help young people on college campuses and community college campuses and getting technical kinds of training after high school to succeed there? Are some of the questions that the research is trying to address at this point.
Right, really trying to figure out, we have kind of a mantra that says everyone can be successful with the right supports, and trying to figure out how does a young adult voice, kind of what those specific needs are. And that's a very different way of now looking at things. Okay, we have to prepare the young adult to be able to tell the support systems in their life what supports they need, because we could spend lots of time and money and resources on all these things going in the different direction than the young adult wanted. What I found in working with young adults is once you find out what they really want, what they honest and truly are going after, whether it's an intimate relationship, a job, their own apartment, or some kind of social situation that they want to be part of a community play or something like that, all the other things kind of fall into place if you support that one thing that they've kind of clicked into. And I find that's the most, with a lot of people, you find out what they're really interested in and how you could support them, and once they realize you're behind them, well, fantastic things happen. So it's really neat to see the research kind of lining up in that way. How do we listen to the young adult? How do we help the young adult express what their needs are? Because a lot of the young adults in the child system have not been asked. They've often been asked to leave the room. So how do we figure out how to best support them and how to help them tell us what they need the most?
To be less authoritarian, which is what we naturally are with children. We're sort of parental with them. Here's what's best for you, sweetie.
We know this.
To try to back off of that while providing some safety net, because young people really, they may be launching off in this way, and it's really what they want to do at that moment, and it might not work. To have some sort of a safety net in place so that they're not crashing in a overly critical kind of way that's really going to be detrimental to their future.
Exactly, to help provide the kind of the dignity of risk with safe parameters. And so that kind of brings us to a little bit of a different topic. Let's transition. I know you work at your research and training center with a lot of young adults with lived experience with mental health issues. And that kind of, it's wonderfully beneficial, because side by side you're asking people to tell you, okay, we're in a work situation. What's important to you? How do we do the research in a way that will best inform future decisions? But it also brings a set of complications as well. Let's talk about that.
Well, I have to say it's been one of the best things about having a research and training center is to have had the opportunity to work with young people with lived experience. And when we started doing this about 2.5 years ago, we brought on somebody who had a lot of experience, Jonathan Delman, who may be known to folks here in Massachusetts as well as nationally, to help us understand how to do that. Our idea was that we wanted to make sure that the research that we were doing was really being informed by their perspective in the design of the research and the data collection and in the interpretation of findings, and then in particular in how we share it with young people so that they could benefit from what we were learning and hear back from them that could maybe inform future research. So that was the idea behind doing it. And when we first started to do it, we hadn't had that much direct experience ourselves. And what we found was, young people have wonderful ideas. All of the young people who have come to work at the center, they've been wonderful at sharing their ideas. They've really embraced how important research. I mean, you think research is a pretty dry topic. Most of us who do it, it's a lot of numbers, a lot of logic, a lot of planning,
exacting,
and sort of the doldrums of collecting the data, then the statistical analyses. They have had great enthusiasm, which has been wonderful.
Which infuses the whole place. I've been at certain meetings and people be like, this is such a great meeting. And people look around and be like, what? And they're like, this kind of enthusiasm doesn't happen typically in a lot of our systems because we have to keep everything in place and make sure all the parameters are there and all the things. But that's been a lot of the comments, like, wow, they bring a whole new energy and a whole new optimism and a realism to the work.
And questions that we never would have considered ourselves. So that aspect of it has just been wonderful. I think where we've really learned a lot is how to make the practical aspects of that work well. So when we first started, transition age youth, as you know, is a very broad age spectrum. For some people, it's, and actually our research and training center is supposed to cover ages 14 to 30 in our research topics. We wanted to hire young adults, and we ended up initially hiring a lot of, I think it was 5 or 6 young adults who had had no working experience, for the most part, any of them. This was their first job.
Wow.
And so what we had was a cadre of people who not only were learning about research, but learning about working in general, all at the same time. One young man found that he was wanting to go to school at the same time, and discovered through working that it was really too much to do both at the same time. And so he was going to prioritize his education for a while. And so that discovery of how does this work for me? We had young people who came in and they thought that they wanted to do work in this particular area, maybe research or helping with how we share the knowledge that we're learning or others have learned. And what they really found was this was not so interesting to them, and they left. And then, a lot of the issues, so having young people who had had no work experience as the entire group, we realized as we were replacing folks who decided to leave, that really mixing it so that there were, there are a lot of young adults who have had a lot of work success under their belts. And having a mixed group where some people are experienced and some people are less experienced has really worked out much better for us. So that was just a learning curve mostly for us.
And it's the peers. We talk a lot on our show about peers helping peers, and it's so much better if the peer taps them and says, you can't wear flip-flops to work,
Right, exactly.
Rather than someone saying like, or you're not really supposed to tell the boss what you did, in detail this weekend. Oh, okay.
And that also raises some of the challenges too, because young people and we have to figure out what are the boundaries then of what you talk about at work, and is this person now your best friend if they're your coworker?
Yes, and the trust levels.
And yet you have to work in the trust levels, and even for an employer, we've hired these young people in part because they have lived experience.
Yes.
And yet trying to set a boundary of how far do we go in talking with them about their current mental health condition if it appears that maybe things are happening that are starting to interfere with their productivity at work, with their ability to work.
Right.
And so we've been learning, there's a learning curve that goes along with that.
Absolutely.
That has been really important for us to learn as well. And our thinking then about the research that we do that is the goal of which is to help us figure out how young people can have more success in developing their working careers. So from a perspective of an employer, what do they need to know about? How much does one disclose? How much accommodation does one ask for? How do you negotiate that relationship with an employer? Because we know that so much about employment is about relationships.
Yes.
And relationships have to do with how you relate with one another, how you express yourself. And when you have a mental health condition, that can often have an effect on that aspect of relationship. So we've, really worked very hard. John Dillman has been absolutely indispensable in trying to figure this out. We've worked with the Genesis Clubhouse in Worcester. A good number of the young people who have worked on our staff have been members of the club, and they've also helped to kind of come in and take a look at the situation with us, with the young person, and thought about how can we make this work best. And sometimes that has really been, how this is going to work best is this isn't the right match right now.
Absolutely. Some of the best work I've done with people is to say, you know what, this isn't the best job for you right now, and that's okay. And it's for your mental health, it might not be the right decision, or for other things in your life, other circumstances, this isn't the right place. And sometimes it's just tweaking. Okay, well, this is what you share with your boss, this is what you share with your therapist, and kind of figuring out those parameters. And once you make them concrete, which works much better with young adults who experience a psychiatric disability, then it can help them move forward in very tangible ways. So that can be a very critical thing.
Yeah.
So you're kind of learning from kind of many different areas. You're learning through the research and while conducting the research, which could actually help people who experience psychiatric disabilities in the working world be better prepared at work. And be more successful at work. That is the hope. So let's talk about some of the other hopes. What do you hope your research will do in the future? How do you see it informing practice or informing programs or policy?
What I would say, I ultimately hope for the research program that we have at UMass, and also for other researchers in the field, is that we really have we develop a good knowledge base about what helps young people progress, have the life that they want, And so to really understand what it is that we need to do to help facilitate that. And in particular, because a lot of people who are doing research to look at interventions for people who struggle with mental health issues, we all have that same goal. Our goal is so much more focused on what is unique to this age group. So if you've learned something about younger adolescents or you've learned something about more mature adults, if we can develop a body of knowledge that says, well, that is likely to change in this way for this age group. And so let's build that into this kind of treatment here. That really is the goal that we have, is to really understand what are their unique developmental needs, or you could even say what are the unique needs because they're a member of youth culture. In some ways it's a cultural issue, which is going to change over time. So some things will change less. You know, how we change during this stage of life is less variable than, you know, what's the current fad, what's the current important thing. The role of technology, for example. If you were studying this age group, you know, 15 years ago, it would have looked very different.
Yes, absolutely.
You know, even though young people are always typically the ones who embrace technology the most rapidly,
Yes.
but then the nature of that technology has changed radically, you know, in the last 15 years or so.
Right, Facebook didn't exist, and you know, parents try and say, well, we're not going to let my child be on Facebook, but then the cheerleading team, that's how they communicate, is on Facebook. So you can't not be part of Facebook.
Yes.
So how do you figure that out?
Exactly.
And then you do a family setting, and then children go in and change around the settings, young adults, and sometimes they can change them around without the parents knowing. So it's a whole new way of dealing with things. Like you used to say, well, some parents said, well, your kids can't go to the mall. Well, if you're going to participate in lots of different sports, you have to have the ability to be on Facebook. And now they're saying the self-esteem of young adults is very connected, young women in particular. So Facebook and what is said and what is not said and how they're invited and not invited, that's a whole nother piece.
Yes.
And then especially if you're a young adult who experiences psychiatric disability and has trouble with some of the more abstract kind of social constructs, it can be like a minefield.
Yes.
Because you could take something the wrong way and it can really connect into depression or connect into feelings of insecurity or really influence your mental health. So it's helping you know, the young adults navigate a whole new forum.
Yes, yeah. I mean, really taking a look at how do we use technology to be the most supportive that it can be.
Absolutely.
You know, we'd like to look at every tool that we could possibly have in our tool bag. And technology is clearly one that's particularly relevant for this age group. And it's going to be different from how it is for younger adolescents or for more mature adults. And really looking at how we can leverage that is one of the more common threads that we see throughout research at this point. And then, you know, thinking about using that going forward. How do we use that to its best advantage? Because the technology changes so rapidly, trying to keep up with that. And how do you build that into your interventions and supports?
Right.
It's just a very rapidly changing kind of technology and knowledge base. So that's a big challenge that I hope that we are able to keep up with in the future.
Absolutely, and that's why we're partnering with young adults, because they're on the cutting edge of that technology.
Exactly. There's nobody that knows better how that applies to their lives. And
Absolutely.
You know, my eyes have been opened much more widely about why we started off with a wiki and now we've ended up with a Weebly. And it's like, what is a Weebly? You know, so I'm kind of constantly being informed about these changes. And you know, I think there just is no way to really understand how to make interventions relevant for young people if you don't involve them in the heart of looking at that very question. You know,
Absolutely.
There are ways that technology wouldn't appeal to young people,
Right.
and then there are ways that it would. And so really understanding that from a research perspective that really says, you know, if we do this, this will be better than that. Or even if we do this, this will be better for this group of young people, but maybe not so much for that group of young people. And those are the kinds of goals for research that we have that hopefully will have a much better handle on how to make all of the interventions that we offer them more widely, make them more available to young people, and have them be more effective in the way that they help them make the changes that they need and want in their lives.
Absolutely, and I think that's a great note to end on, to think about, how do we more greatly involve young adults and how do we help them figure out how to best help us help them. Mm-hmm. Yeah. Fantastic. So Maryann, I'd like to say thank you so much. You've given us a lot of great things to think about and a lot of great things to be kind of pondering on how we can further help young adults in their transition to adulthood, the emerging adults.
It's been a real pleasure to be on. Thank you for having me.
Thank you very much. And I'd like to say thank you to our viewers for tuning in to Picking Up the Pieces, Dare to Persevere, as we help transition age youth go on to be the adults that they would like to be. And we'd like to also thank the Department of Mental Health for sponsoring our show. And I'd like to thank the audience for tuning in. And we'd like you to watch out for someone who might be in need of that extra support to reach their full potential, because you might just be that person that helps them achieve their true success. Thank you very much.